Welcome to the CADclass Podcast, where makers are made. Today we're joined by Rob Culpi of Vantopia Vans. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Great to be here.
What is Vantopia Vans?
So I describe Vantopia as the IKEA of vans. So we make van conversion kits for most of the popular vans, such as the Sprinters, Transits, and ProMasters. And basically it's a way to pick and choose different modules, different cabinetries, and different layouts that you want for your van. And it all comes flat pack shipped. You could assemble it yourself, saves a bunch of money compared to a full custom van conversion kit, and saves a lot of time compared to a DIY kit. So it's a good balance between cost and efficiency. And we've been doing this for about 4, probably going on 5 years now. And it's been a super fun business, seen a lot of growth and been loving it.
This sounds an awful lot like a pandemic business, if you ask me.
It was. The timing, as you could tell, 4 or 5 years was a pandemic business. So before Vantopia, I was working with my current business partner, Eric Durr, on another company called Maverick PDM, where we were doing product design for hire. So that was a super fun business too. I would often describe it as a reverse Shark Tank, where people would come to us with different ideas, different products that they want to make, and they would pay us to design, manufacture, and prototype it, which was super fun. I really liked doing all the design and prototyping work. They got to handle the marketing side of it, which I'm starting to get to enjoy a bit more now, getting more into Vantopia. But I was always more interested in the prototyping and design side of the business. So super fun business. A lot I learned from that, a lot that got applied to Vantopia. But at the time, during pandemic, that business really slowed down, and the concept of Vantopia was something I've been playing with for a while, and it was a perfect time. No one was really doing new products at the time. Everyone was tightening their budgets. No one was really trying too much new, and the vans were starting to take off a bit more. And I always wanted to build a business kind of based off of the CNC machine. So the CNC machine is called computer numerical control. Basically, it's a router that's controlled by, you could almost call it a robot, but it's really just a couple stepper motors, kind of like a 3D printer in reverse, where instead of adding material, it's subtracting material. And I always want to build a business around that, going backwards from that. I know I love the CNC machine. I thought it was a great way to do domestic manufacturing, do stuff in-house that's both very easy to prototype, but also very scalable, where once you make the design, you really could kind of just like press the green button and the CNC does all the work for you. And so it was a great way to really leverage that equipment as much as possible. And I kind of wanted to build that product line and build that business around that machine. Yeah, it's worked really well so far, and that's really been a guiding light for us.
You've managed to do something remarkable, I think, that our audience would appreciate, and that is you've managed to build a scaled business inside of a makerspace. So for those who don't know what a makerspace is basically like a gym where you can go and rent equipment and time on equipment. Typically, you bring your own materials, and then you're able to use these machines just as if you were going to the gym to work out. But instead of going to the gym to work out, you get to use miter saws and table saws and welding equipment and whatever it is that they have in exchange for a monthly fee and maybe some safety basics classes. One of the things that we've thought and talked a lot about here on the CADclass podcast is many folks inside of those makerspaces have a difficult time understanding how to go from hobbyist to professional, meaning I have an idea, I'd like to turn this into something that's a sustainable business. What I think Vantopia has done well, and is probably one of the top examples in makerspaces, is you managed to build this product using that equipment and scale inside of it before, and congratulations on this, before just recently moving out and getting your own facility. So can you talk a little bit about how you went from idea to prototype to sales, to enough sales to graduate out of the makerspace and get your own space?
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of that was actually learned from the product design business and learning from seeing what clients were doing sometimes and learning from what they're doing good and what maybe they could have done a bit better. So I always see people kind of having this, one is a very optimistic view that things are going to go really well, and they've really planned for this big budget and planned for, a huge ton of sales. And I think there's a survivor bias in the market in general. So, you'll see these people, especially like the startup-y companies, where they had this like huge growth, they had this idea, maybe they get on Shark Tank or something else like that. And you think, oh, that's going to be me, not realizing that's maybe like the top 5, 10% of actual businesses making it. And sometimes people, I'd say, place too big of a bet on one particular idea rather than testing the waters and placing like smaller bets on more ideas and seeing which bets are actually paying off and what is actually getting some traction earlier on. So we kind of wanted to be like a cockroach business in the sense that it would be hard to kill. You know, what I think kills a lot of businesses, and I think it looks good and it looks really attractive if you raise, let's say if you have a business and you're going to raise, $10 million to start that business, it seems like a big blessing and understandably so. But with that $10 million, you're expected to hire, you're expected to get a new facility, you're expected to start to scale up. And those all get pretty expensive. And if you don't have traction on your product, and if you can't secure another round of funding, the business could kind of die. It just drowns under its own weight, drowns under its own expenses. So we were looking to do something that can't be killed, something that we're going to keep our expenses low. So even if we struggle a bit, takes a little bit to find our footing, we don't have this like overburden of expenses, overburden of employees that's going to basically kill the business, even if the concept is good. And I think you'd even see that in a lot of like tech companies, that the initial idea was good. Maybe they just like overraised and overdid it. I don't know. For some reason, to me, like Juicero comes to mind, where like they raised a bunch of money. They made this like really complicated product. They had a bunch of like advertising, and that kind of like killed the business. I think it was like actually not that bad of a product idea. Like, fresher juice sounds pretty good. And I don't know enough about the company to be too critical of it, but it seems like that concept could have survived if they did a more methodical, slow approach, which admittedly isn't sexy for a lot of people. And it's not sexy for the investors either. The investors, they want to spread their risk. They're taking that like small bet. It's just the $10 million or whatever is a small bet to them. But to the actual founder, it's a very big bet. Whereas the investor is taking 10, 20, maybe even 100 different individual bets, and they're just hoping one pays out. As the founder, you're taking a much bigger risk because you really only have one thing that you could put your time on, realistically. Maybe one or two, but for the most part, like really one thing that you could put your time on. So you're really putting a lot of your eggs in that one basket. And so I kind of wanted to go with that approach of having a business that can't be killed. And that Makerspace came into that frame of reference because the expenses were so much lower there. Like we don't have to buy our own equipment. We could kind of adjust like even month to month as sales grew or declined. It's a great place to hire some independent contractors from too, because a lot of people already have the skill sets. So as we were growing, well, of course, like when we started out, I was the only one running the CNC machine. As we started to grow, I would hire out people from that Makerspace to run the machine for us. We also hire other people to, again, just as like independent contractors, just depending on their own schedule and as much work is needed. We'd be able to hire out doing installs, hire out doing packaging of products, basically everything else that the business needed without needing a big commitment in terms of space, in terms of employees. And we grew it until we maxed out the place. We were kind of hogging up the machines a bit more. We had quite a few people working for us in there. And it was really it was a good sign. And I think that we were forced out to some extent, not by the management, but just by our own business needs, that we just grew to that point that there was no other option. And I saw other people do kind of the opposite. They would just have a concept. There was someone I knew that they were building some product. I won't mention what it was, but they were building some product also based on the CNC machine. And they couldn't get enough time on the machine by themselves. And instead of going that approach that we did, they went straight to getting a whole facility. I think it was maybe like 2,000 square feet or so. But the rent is pretty expensive here in Southern California. So I think they were probably spending like $3,000-4,000 a month at the very least, probably more, maybe $4,000 to $5,000. And they probably bought like $200,000 in equipment without like ever really selling a real product, without actually like having much demand for it. And people have that approach sometimes, unfortunately, where they think that if you have this debt, if you have these rents to pay, it will be a motivator somehow. That's how people kind of described it to me. It'll be a motivator to work harder and push through. I don't really understand that logic, but I kind of saw that opposite effect happening and people kind of just getting way too into the kind of like the vanity metrics. Like it looks cool to have a big shop. It feels nice to have all this brand new equipment, everything else like that.
It's a justification also for your own maybe wasting of time. Maybe what you're
Yeah,
doing is productive, but it's pretty easy to go look at all of the shiny objects I have. It must mean that I'm doing something really cool and I'm not actually wasting my time. So I completely agree.
exactly. Yeah, it's the vanity metric. It's something that like looks good. You could show off to your friends. You could bring some friends over, like, haha, look at this cool shop I got. Look at all those fancy new equipment I got. It's kind of measuring from the wrong metric. I usually like to say, like one of my favorite lines in business, and probably someone else said it first, but is sales solves all. If you have sales, you could figure pretty much everything else out. You could figure out your product as long as it's somewhat reasonable. If you're not selling something that's non-existent or impossible to make, of course. But if you have the sales, you could figure out how to scale up. You could figure out everything else afterwards. It's really making sure that that's what's driving the business and that's what's kind of giving you your incentive and feedback to see what's going right and what you need to double down on or what you need to kind of back away from. So we had like product lines that, didn't get enough sales, didn't get enough traction, and we stopped making them because it wasn't worthwhile. Even from
Now,
the
one thing I do
beginning.
want to touch on that you said a little bit ago was for a lot of businesses that you want to see is kind of dipping their toes in the water and kind of going into the smaller end to verify that you do have the sales so then you can proceed into the kind of the next level of business.
Yeah.
Your product is really vast. The idea of being able to fit effectively an entire living quarter inside a van expands into place it's a huge operation. It's a large product to manufacture, to design, to ship, to organize. All the analytics that goes into it is really intense. Is that where you started on that front?
Yeah, and so that's a great point. And this is again kind of that like cockroach business approach that we, before we even actually made our first product, we made a render of what the product could kind of look like, kind of skipping some of the details that you wouldn't see really in a render. And we posted on Facebook Marketplace, we posted on Craigslist. I don't know if we even had a website at that time, but we posted it on there and kind of sent the description. We're making this new product design. We gave them a decent discount. It was basically like a free install. So we have the cost of the actual kit itself, and then sometimes, and especially in the start, we had an installation option too. And so we basically gave people like a free install. They would still buy the kit. And we had people reach out through Facebook. The first customer was another guy named Josh, not you, Josh, a gentleman out of Arizona who's been great to work with. He even came back and bought a second kit from us. And he liked the product. He reached out on Facebook Marketplace, I believe it was. And, he had his van. He dropped off the van. We took all the measurements off of that van that we needed and then did our first install, kind of first full build out. And so we had actually like zero startup costs. Like we got paid on our first product. We made a profit on our first product. We didn't even buy the wood ahead of time, of course, until the guy paid us. So there was that's kind of rare to do, I would think, but I think that's a good approach to not have any money into the business before you actually know that it's a product that people want and people are actually going to give you money for it. It's good to do surveys. It's good to get a gauge of, let's say, we did surveys to figure out like which models were most popular that we should target, which layouts were most popular. But I think people often say they want something, but you don't actually know until they give you money.
I love that. Can you, for those who don't understand what a render is, can you talk just briefly about what a render is? And then I'd also like to double click on that because so often people go, I'm going to invent a product, and they go straight to the product invention phase, meaning they buy the parts, they arrive, they go through all this hassle to do it, they build it, it doesn't work right. They get 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years, I've heard crazier numbers down the line, and they finally have a product they think works, and then they go to put it out in the market, and there's crickets, there's nobody there to talk to, there's nobody that actually wants the solution at the price point they're willing to offer it at. So when you say render, can you give us some sense of what that is, and then also go maybe a little bit deeper on how folks in our audience, given that we're the CADclass podcast, given how other people in our industry can think about doing something similar?
Yeah, so my business partner, Eric, used Inventor, Autodesk Inventor, to do most of the design work. I use Fusion 360 to generate the renders. Great programs. I don't know if do you guys know anything about Fusion 360 or any of those?
A little bit here and there.
Oh,
Oh,
I've never
okay.
heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I think I've seen the logo.
Yeah, so we use Fusion 360 to make these renders. Just I wouldn't say photorealistic, but just a kind of like a visual representation of what the product looked like. And it was just kind of like the cabinetry. We didn't even have the visual of the van itself. So it was just without the van, just kind of floating cabinetry pretty much, just showing what it would potentially look like. And yeah, that's how we started out with that, just a visual of that. And like the surveys are good, but people actually give you money is what matters. And especially in like a physical product, and a digital product to be a bit different. But for a physical product, like that's again the sales solves all type of thing. Like if people are gonna give you money for even just a visual representation of a product that doesn't even exist yet, you're probably onto something, and that's probably worth pursuing more. And again, it was a very small bet for us. We just put a little bit of our time into it and making that render, doing some research, and posting on Facebook Marketplace. But there was actually like no money involved in order for us to get our first paying customer. And a pretty significant.
The idea of spending thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars on a company that has never manufactured anything purely on a render. I can imagine a lot of people going, oh my God, that sounds risky. That sounds really sketchy. And from what Josh and I know, I'm sure you know as well, that the amount of product that people sell online that have never existed, it is purely just a render that you're not expecting to be just created by a soulless computer that has never actually existed, is so unbelievably common. One of the really good statistics that we always love is that, like, if you've ever picked up an IKEA catalog and you go, "Oh, that looks nice. That bookcase looked cool. Oh, that kitchen island, that looks great." 75% of the pictures in those catalogs have never existed. Almost all of them are completely computer generated. And because you didn't expect it, you go, yeah, that's probably a real thing. And then you bought it and then it arrives. That's how most kind of prototype or small early start businesses, that's how they bloom.
Yeah. And yeah, just kind of like testing those waters and making sure you actually have something. Because I've seen, and this is again kind of coming from that product development background, one of the questions I would often ask both clients, even friends when they're trying to start a business and picking their brains about it, is how much money is it going to cost you to get to your first product sale? A lot of people don't think about that for whatever reason. They think of this like bigger picture, or maybe like too far, too hopeful of a dream, which is, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer on it too much, but it'd be too optimistic, too hopeful on some of these things. And because a lot of these products, like if you're going to get tooling, even something like basic, I'm just looking at my microphone here. Like if you're going to make a new microphone, you have to go through like the tooling involved in this. You have to set up production. You have to get initial product run, let's say like 1,000 units or so. Maybe you could get it down to 500, but still. And then all like the tooling involved, and even like a simple product like a microphone, like you're probably going to spend close to like $250,000 on it to do the multiple rounds of tooling, multiple rounds of testing, multiple prototypes, and everything else in that. Like you're looking at a pretty hefty budget. And yeah, hopefully it works, and you'll see successful companies that will have gone through that route. But there is a bit of that survivor bias, and you're missing out on all the people that spent that $250,000, spent that $500,000 or whatnot, and didn't get anywhere for it. And I never want to like discourage or make fun of other products, but I see it all the time on like the Kickstarter type of stuff that this isn't physically possible. What you're trying to sell here, like I look at these and maybe just being a little bit more in that industry, like you can't actually make this thing that you're pitching on making. And you see it all the time, and it's good to know like what that number is, and maybe it's still worthwhile. I think a somewhat recent one, and I don't know too much about it, but is like a founder of Dyson was trying to make his own electric car. And I think he spent like close to $1 billion on it. It's been a while since I read that article, but that's like a good example of a very difficult and complicated product. And it's just the nature of it. I don't have a cheaper way to make that necessarily. But he spent like close to $1 billion to like develop a product. I don't know if he ever sold one. And that's fine for him. He's got the funds for it. But for most people, you can't actually spend that much money. And it's going to get pretty scary at one point when you have that much money into it without actually selling a product and needing to know where the next round of funding. You're going to have unforeseen budget expenses or expenses that you didn't didn't think we're going to be as big as they are, or product or prototypes fail and everything else like that. So again, I like having that cockroach business approach. The Makerspace was a really good testing ground for that, to bring it back to our initial point. At the Makerspace, like, you don't have to get all this fancy equipment, and even like the employees, like, it's Makerspace is a great place to find one and the other co-founders. That's where I met my business partner Eric, and a couple other people that we work with as well too, because they already have an interest. They're often already trained on different products and different programs, and it's a great place to really grow as much as you can from there. Like, I think you could easily have a $500,000 business. I think we were even doing more out of that, but doing a $500,000 business like out of a makerspace, if you really structure it right and really try to be scrappy with it. To show how scrappy we were at one point, I don't know if we've said this before, but we had a CNC. I had an Avid CNC. So Avid was it's a CNC company. They make CNC parts and whatnot. For a while, I had a 4-foot by 4-foot one. We chopped it up and made it into a 4-foot by 8-foot. Reconverted into like a bigger CNC. We build like a whole like welded steel base for it. Again, using welders from the shop, people that already had technical skills in that. I'm an okay welder, but other people are better. And we put it in a box truck because it was cheaper than rent. And that was a way to like validate that we had the sales and we had people actually wanting the product. So we were doing a decent chunk of our production out of a box truck because it was cheaper than rent and it was the fairly affordable equipment. Repurposing something that was not quite meant for that. But
this sounds pretty insane, right? So I think it is. To the average listener, to somebody just tuning in here, they go, what kind of skill set does this crazy person have, right? So they're thinking that you've been doing this for 30, 40 years. You must have been thinking about things like manufacturing and making in order to build something as complex as you have with Vantopia. In order to build a CNC truck, custom fit CNC truck with all of these welded, customized parts that we were talking about, you must have some serious skill set. And yet, Rob, you did not study engineering. You came into this without an engineering background. You came into it, I would say, as a kind of a curious hobbyist, somebody who wanted to start a business in the industry, but you don't have decades of experience. Am I right?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to give a lot of credit to my business partner, Eric, who is very similar mindset to me on this, really trying to make an unkillable business. He has a great skill set for all of this, so I do have to give him a lot of credit on making a lot of this happen. As far as my background, though, so yeah, I studied business management economics at UC Santa Cruz. I don't remember too much from my actual degree. What really stuck with me was all my entrepreneurial classes and courses. So I think they had like a certification program I did, and it was basically a club that was entrepreneurship focused, and we did a couple different rounds of it. So in university, I wanted to have like a bike generator, which would be like a way to power. It was like for medical devices or kind of just power lights or kind of just like simple like 12-volt applications in rural villages, basically. And it was just kind of a business concept class. We did some musical devices using ultrasonic like depth gauge. We did another really fun one I liked that I did in university was drones for agriculture, and this was pretty early on. This was, 13 years ago? Man, we had a company called Skyography where the concept was that we would fly over entire agricultural regions with somewhat like a swarm of drones, and we would use this technique called NDVI, I believe if I'm remembering that correctly. But basically, it was a measurement of infrared light to visible light. There would be a comparison that you could do between those that would gauge plant health. And you could do more targeted precision agriculture where you only needed to apply pesticides or water on certain areas of your agriculture, kind of know like which crops are stressed before they actually start to die. And you could use that one to sell the data to farmers, but also to like industry analysts. And this was especially applicable in California where you have it's like 80% of the grape production, 90% of the citrus production, maybe 80% of citrus, but all these like tree nuts, a lot of these kind of specialty crops, a lot of them are 80, 90% are grown in California. And the idea was that you could fly over the entire region and basically get an entire metric of the health of the crop for the entire year. Better than anyone else, like how many almonds are going to be produced this year? Like how good of an almond crop are you going to have? before any individual farmer knows, because maybe an individual farmer gets like a slight guess of it, but you would know that before anyone else did. And that was a fun concept, but I think that was another one where I kind of ran into that problem of, yeah, it would a scaling issue. Like you didn't have a good way to go from, and it was actually, the drones were a little bit of a gray area legally at the time for business applications, but there wasn't a good way to transition from this kind of small prototype to this big idea. And maybe it's still viable, but it's kind of like a riskier one to spend your time on. But there wasn't a good way to transition from this individual concept into the bigger picture and getting all of California's crop yields.
What it makes me think here is shots on goal is what matters in business. So it's common for folks to understand that in order to grow bigger muscles, you need to go to the gym, right? You need to go to the gym. You need to do it frequently. You need to change your diet. There's certain foods that you can eat. There's amount of protein that you need to get. There's amount of weight that you should consistently lift. And if you do that often enough, you will gain muscle. Right? There's the correlation there. So people have that idea in their head that going to the gym, gain muscle, that's how we do it. And yet somehow I feel a lot of folks get stuck on this idea that their first idea is going to be genius. It's going to be the best thing ever. They'll never have taken a shot on goal and somehow put it right down the middle of the net. But what I've just heard you say is it's taken you some time to both figure out where the goal is and then to refine your shots on it. And so in this journey, you've taken a lot of shots on goal. I'm hearing business idea after business idea. And this is kind of the general sentiment I would want to leave our audience with is make sure first that you're taking shots and then try to refine what you're shooting towards. Make sure that you're actually aiming towards the goal. And now your metric is simply shots on goal. So if you could take more shots on goal, you will likely come across something that succeeds at some point. And this idea that there's a business failure or something that didn't work in the past, or to your point about drones, you're like wrong place, wrong time, maybe not quite the right technology, maybe who knows what exactly the problem was, but you were starting to refine your beliefs around what might work. And now fast forward to today, and the other point that you made is you're almost unwilling to invest money in an idea before at least starting to find out if there's some interest or people around it that may be willing to open their wallet and pay you some money, which again sounds like a hard-earned shot on goal.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's a good way to put it. I think I definitely kind of scaled back the ideas over time, which is almost kind of counterintuitive. I think usually people think bigger and bigger over time, and maybe that still works out for them. But for me, it ended up being that the lesson learned was getting the sales as soon as possible, getting people to pay you for your product. And if you could do that as quickly, as cheaply as possible, I know it's pretty rare to be able to get away with having someone pay you for a product that doesn't exist yet. I know people do reservations, which is an okay system too. I'm sure there's some limitations around that too. But having people actually pay you for something to actually show there's a demand for it, you're onto something here, I think is a great way to start. Yeah, the Makerspace, if you can stick with it as long as possible. I would almost love to stay in the Makerspace longer. We did just move to our own shop space, but we did outgrow it. I love the social aspect of it. It's a great way to meet people with a similar mindset, and you get a lot of exposure to different skill sets that people have, different projects that they're working on, gets you to think about it. Great place to like bounce your ideas on people too. I always hate people that are, that's too strong of a word, but I hate when people are too hesitant on like sharing their idea. Like, I have this great idea, but I can't tell you because if you know, you're going to take it. And to me, that's always so silly because if it's that easy of an idea to take, someone's going to do it anyways. And especially as like a random person, I kind of maybe understand like maybe not publishing it like online or something, but at least to like friends or acquaintances, like stuff like that, like it's good to bounce some ideas around it. You get a lot of bad advice, admittedly, though. A lot of people are gonna tell you don't do van conversion business, but in general, it's a great way to bounce ideas. I know Josh, when we were brewing beer and playing chess, what was it, 8 years ago, 7 years ago or something, I think you were originally looking at doing like a mobile woodwork shop. Like you wanted to do something like that, and I was pushing you away from that. I know you had some skill set in education in general, and I was pushing you more towards like the CAD and 3D printing course too. So maybe I had a little bit of influence on you.
Yeah.
Just because I thought that would be more scalable and more in demand. Wood is, knowing from experience, is messy and could be hard to manage. But I always loved doing stuff that, like, especially in America, labor is expensive. So trying to have products and businesses so that you could leverage machinery as much as possible is a great way to go. And that's why we built the business from the CNC backwards, where we'd start off with equipment and the production processes and figure out what products we can make with that. Similarly for you guys, I know you started off going into like 3D printing and more on the education side because that has a lot more scalability to it. And I still have 3D printing. I have a couple myself. I don't use them as much as I used to. Something like that where it's scalable and you actually know that you could, if you have an idea, you could keep pressing print. And for us, it's keep pressing the green button on the CNC and make something at scale.
So, fun fact, we talked about this a little bit before the pod. You tried to talk us into doing a 3D printing, not so much CAD, but 3D printing was a big part of this business. And I tried very hard, probably while brewing beer together, to convince you that I thought this gigantic wood project where you had to deal with all these shippings of materials in and out, and then it's loud, it's dusty, it's hard to move around. It felt like that was the wrong idea inside of a makerspace to me. And yet here we are, fast forward, and we did in fact pursue 3D printing along with CAD, but 3D printing as our business. So you were right there. And you also did pursue Vantopia. And I am still eating my words on a lot of this. So I think you're completely correct. I mean, when you make these van conversion kits, this is like 17 sheets of plywood. In my head, I thought, how in the world are they going to deal with 17 sheets of plywood at scale over and over and over again? It just felt like such a bad idea to me. And maybe that's also the point of the story is you tested the idea. You said, hey, I think there's a market here. I just gave you my advice, which was completely untested. And maybe this is the point, is if you run up against somebody who thinks what you're doing is a bad idea, perhaps what you can do is run some tests yourself to find out whether or not it's a good or a bad idea. And then you can do away with the, is it a good idea or bad idea theoretically, and instead move into the realm of the practical.
Yeah, and I think what you'd look at for what both of those things have in common, both the Vantopia business and the CNC around that, the CNC router, as well as the 3D printing, is that there's a scalability derived from that technology. The fact that for the 3D print, you could spend a lot of time like making that initial design, but if the design works, you could repeat the process, press go again, you have your little print farm or whatnot. It's also easier to hand off to someone else too. I probably have a problem of enjoying the process too much, so I keep wanting to do it myself. But it is something that you could hand off a little bit easier to someone else. And similar with both 3D printing and the CNC router, there is, I don't want to really say call a robot, but there is kind of a robotic, computerized, technology-based advantage for that. I would say everything that you were saying about dealing with wood, dealing with dust, dealing with materials, completely correct. In that woodworking field, I've known a lot of people that tried to do woodworking businesses, some more successful than others, but it is a challenging business because it's difficult to scale. It's like reliant on your own skill set. And unless you could leverage some level of technology that will help you scale, it's a tough business to get into. I mean, I think like a way, if you are a woodworker, honestly, better way to, yeah, you can make your furniture and you could set up that production. I think that could be cool, but you'd have to kind of really get it focused, stick to one design, or maybe even sell your designs type of thing. Do something scalable. Like it's hard to do like a custom furniture business at scale. And it could be fine for individual income, and it's going to take some time to build that up. But for actually growing into something that you could hire people on and actually become a business you can almost take yourself out of a bit more, I think you do need to have some level of scalability in mind from the very start. You need to start with that end goal in mind and work backwards from that.
Now, I wanted to know from all of the businesses that you said that you spawned from this, that there seems to be some point in the timeline that you go, okay, this is actually working. This is now something that we absolutely need to invest into and dive straight into it. With Vantopia, it seems to be, oh, you guys really bootstrapped it. Very, very minimal time and money on the input. But then at a certain point, you're like, okay, this is actually picking up steam. We're doing really well. We can now get our own facility. And I can imagine for a lot of people, especially in the makerspace world, but they're surrounded by a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of dreamers, that it can corrupt you a little bit. Is there a way where you can decipher, okay, this product is actually doing really well? There is some kind of internal metric where I go, I want to invest full time into this, where I can push away everyone else's hyper positive reviews, over the top, kind of diluted views, but you can go, okay, we can absolutely make money with this. This is something that we need to do.
Yeah, again, I would say it's the sales solves all type of metric. We had another product, one of the ones that we did before Maverick PDM, and this was with Eric again. Again, really smart guy for all this type of thing. We had another product called Ampware, where we would have a self-charging phone case. It was kind of like an old like crank radio where you're winding up a radio, but this would be a phone case that had a little generator on the back of it, and you could wind it up to charge your phone. It's a good case study because it got a lot of interest. A lot of people, I think we were on Unbox Therapy, we were on CNET, we like had pretty good like press coverage for it, and people liked the novelty of it, but the sales weren't there because it was a little, admittedly, like almost a little gimmicky looking in hindsight. Like just a battery case is honestly going to work better than that product. But we were looking at the wrong metric of interest because we had a lot of people like interested in it. I think that's an okay metric, but it's not a great one. What's really going to make the business succeed is the sales. So if you have a good product that people are going to buy and then buy multiple times again, like I was saying, like for Vantopia, we had customers like buy one kit, buy a second kit. I think we've had even people buy like 3 kits. Some people have been making businesses buying our kits and renting out vans or reselling them. But we had like multiple customers and people actually wanting to pay, wanting to give you money. That's really the ultimate metric. Interest is a good, I don't know, like starting out or kind of rough metric. But really, when you know to double down on something and when you could feel like you could start investing in it more, I would say is when people actually start to give you money, actually start to pay you for it.
So just to dive just slightly deeper on that for just a second, you don't just make one sale and then decide, oh, okay, this is a smashing success. Do you work backwards through what do I need to make this sustainable for my life quickly? And then what does it look like long-term to grow it? Are you like, help me understand, because I understand that sales is important, but what I don't understand is at what point do you make the decision, I'm in, I'm all in on this idea, I'm pursuing it, I have enough sales to take the world over. What does that look like?
I mean, I would almost say that sounds like an overconfidence in it, in that you never really get that level of clarity. It's always like a constant feedback. You also don't want to, you want to make sure that you're not making a product that only appeals to like that little like innovator or like early adopter section of the market. You want to make sure that it's something that is going to have a larger market appeal. And again, something that's like scalable. Let's say if you want to have a $1 million business, you could look at it, you need to make $3,000 a day. So it is the product that you're making, can you realistically see getting that level of revenue per day? And it could be tough, like for a lot of, let's say, not to harp on like woodworking too much, but if you're like making furniture, it could be tough as a solo furniture maker or even like having a small team or whatnot to actually make $3,000 revenue a day. Like it could be tough. And that's including weekends too. So take weekends out, like you even have less day to actually get to that metric. And maybe that's not people's goal. Maybe they want more of like a lifestyle business. That $1 million goal isn't something you need. But it is good to work backwards from that end goal. Like I was kind of saying, the goal of having a scalable business and having something like revolved around the CNC. I knew I wanted to make a product using a CNC router before Vantopia ever existed. And I kind of saw the need for it. I saw people building out these vans for a year and a half, and they're not carpenters. They don't have the skill set. I had a friend that's a nurse, and it took her like a year and a half to build out her van. She did a great job with it, but she had to like learn how to be a carpenter along the way. She had to learn how to be an electrician, a plumber, pretty much everything else. And that seemed like a pretty obvious need for me. And she didn't want to spend the $50,000 to $100,000 at a minimum typically to get a custom made van. So we saw that need in the market. There really wasn't too much out there at the time. There's a couple more people doing a similar thing at the moment, but not the way we are, I would say. Not nearly as modular, not nearly as efficient, I would say. But yeah, I think it's like a constant feedback that you have to look for. And again, the sales is the ultimate validator.
Yeah, it's a good answer. There's nuance to the answer.
Yeah.
To bring it back to the CAD-ness of it for our audience, do you find that there was a specific turning point in the design of your product on the CAD side that you went, okay, this is going to be revolutioning how we design it, how we manufacture it, how we sell it? Was there some kind of, not secret sauce, not giving away too much of what makes you guys special, but something within the design portion that made you go, okay, this is now officially viable?
I know it's kind of a disappointing answer, but probably no. I think it's more of like a means to an end. The goal isn't necessarily just make CAD designs, and I think there's often an over engineering that people will do. Well, they'll make things like a little too complicated just because it's like cool and like fancier. I think like simple is better, and that's kind of the approach that we took. So the CAD is kind of like a means to that end. Like, I don't want to make it overly complicated. I think there's a lot of really cool features that we have. We have this like slot upper cabinet that allows the upper cabinet to bend, which is cool. A lot of different like module options. We kind of have like standardized the sizing that things could be like swapped out for. There's a lot of little stuff, I would say, that we take advantage of that CAD design. But I don't want to say, I think there's almost like a cautionary tale to not make it overly complicated either, and not make it fancy just for the sake of being fancy. And then I think trying to keep it as simple as possible as you can, which is a good constraint. And I know, Josh, we talked about this before too, but I think there's innovation is easier under constraints, in that when you're thinking too big picture and you have this big open field of ideas, it's like hard to think of. Like, let's say if you're like building a house almost, for example, it's hard to think of, all right, like just a blank space house, it's hard to think of. It's better if you have a constraint, like, all right, we have a hill, we have this view here, it's facing north, like all these things that are like inputs that are going to constrain your idea and help you like build that design. I think that's really helpful. And I think how I often like to think of new ideas is kind of like smashing two different concepts together, such as for us, the Vantopia was IKEA for vans.
We're calling this segment, by the way, Idea Smash. Okay, so you have two ideas, and you smush them together, and what pops out the other side might be this interesting new thing. So the IKEA of van conversion kits, right? So people are already converting their vans, and IKEA furniture is this nice little kind of it's like pretty easy to assemble DIY kit. So it's super easy to imagine. So Idea Smash.
Yeah. And it makes it so much simpler, and like it helps you like think of that concept so much better. The other one, of course, like Ampere being like the self-charging phone case, or you take the radio, which you saw the crank for that. Obviously, the radio is like a good part of emergency contact, if you lose power or whatnot, to stay charged, and applying that to your phone, because that's almost like the new radio. And that was a concept for that. And I think there's I think it gets a little bit overused, but the idea of like Uber for blank, or Airbnb for blank. I know people overuse it a bit, but I think it gets overused because there is some truth to that taking one concept and applying it to a new business, I think is always a great way to think of innovation. And it's a good way to constrain yourself and know like what works here and what works here. Let's combine those two.
Yeah, so for those struggling with ideas in our audience, just take any two concepts that you already enjoy, smush them together, write a couple of your ideas down. Keep generating from there. I love that. I think I also want to talk about something here as we're getting towards the end of the hour, which is the invention of the obvious.
Yeah.
I really think this is something that is underappreciated. You think in the world that we're in now that everything has already been invented. How could I possibly come up with an idea that's unique and interesting? So for this segment, I want you to tell me something that was invented and then something that was added onto it, but many years later. And then we're going to play a little game of how long we think it's been.
So yeah, just to go a little bit before I get too into that, I do like that concept a lot. If I'm going to write a book, it's probably going to be on that idea of invention of the obvious, because I think people have this idea that all the good ideas are taken. And, there's 8 billion people out there. If there's a good idea, someone has already done it, and like, why try it out? And you look back in history and there's so many of them that you will look at and they seem so obvious in hindsight. It's like painfully obvious. And you wonder like, how did no one think of that? And there's so many of them. Like we were talking about that earlier. One of the classic ones is pockets. Like, Jake, when do you think pockets were invented?
Oh God, I'm just trying to pull it back one step, and I've seen
Like, you've
like
had clothing for so long.
early humans that have been like preserved in a bog for 5,000 years that have
Yeah,
pants.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Like conceptually, I think that's difficult before we even get into the manufacturing of it. But I would say, oh God, I would have to say at least a couple thousand years after the invention of the pant to begin with.
Yeah, I don't know when the pants were invented, but pockets were 1600s. So think of like
What?
all this civilization that you have. And it makes sense because people had like a satchel. Would have a belt. They'd have a
Yeah.
little coin purse, a little satchel, a little bag, and the idea to have like a pocket sewn into your clothing. I know some like women dresses still haven't caught on yet, but
Yeah, I was gonna say I
uh,
can't wait for women's clothing to have that invention.
they're getting just gonna get a bit bigger. But to have actual pockets in there, like 1600s, and like once you have it, it's of course like why would you not have that? And it seems so obvious. Another one too is stirrups, like a place to actually have your feet while you're riding a horse. Think of like how long people have been riding horses. You have all this like Egyptian civilization, even early Roman, and stirrups really coming around like 300 AD. And like again, once it's invented, it seems so plainly obvious. Another favorite one of mine, and I'm gonna kind of rattle through these. I know I'm not doing the game as much, but wheelbarrow. Think of a wheelbarrow. You have two handles. You have a wheel in the front. Like, how long has the wheel existed? Like the classic early invention. Some argument about like the date for it, but in China around like 200 AD, in Europe like 1200 AD.
I like the idea of someone like, oh, every single time I have to keep my wallet and my keys, I have to use my wheelbarrow. Oh, I should
Yeah,
make pockets. Oh, great.
yeah, yeah. That was 300. Another favorite one of mine is bullets. Like you have a gun existing from around like 1000 AD or so, and then bullets only being invented like 1880. You have like nearly like 800 years, actually over 800 years, going that you have to like, all right, let me put a little piece of gunpowder,
Yeah.
let me put like a little ball and pack it in there, and but like an actual true bullet that you have a cartridge, and it seems so obvious. Like, how do you, if you're under fire, how is no one thinking like, I wish there was a better way to pack this down. I wish there was a faster way to do this. And yeah, there is some like manufacturing technology to actually make it happen, but so many of these. Another one, a personal favorite too, is shipping containers. Like, when do you think shipping containers were invented?
Oh, that's got to be recent. That's got to be really
Yeah,
recent.
it was kind of like Korean War was a big part of it. It was in 1956, I believe. And you have all of like logistics of World War II, and you see it in the old videos. They're using like cargo nets and individual like pallets and like boxes. You'd see them like carry bananas and like big little cargo nets and whatnot.
Just to expand on that, before we go on to our final section,
Yeah.
in my mind, and this may ring true to a lot of people, oftentimes the invention is purely just the standardization of it. Like the standardization of the shipping container, oh,
Hmm.
they're all exactly the same dimensions. Some of them are ratioed, oh, they're exactly half the size, but they all
Yeah.
snap together. One of the best like accelerations during like the Industrial Revolution is like standardizing the threads on like bolts and screws. Like there's
Exactly.
kind of a
Yeah.
famous story that even not even within the world, not even with the country, but within London, there was 13 different standards of threads. So nobody could sell a bolt and a screw and a nut and a washer that went to anyone. And
That's
it just
ridiculous. Yeah.
log jammed manufacturing so much. So I think if people are going, oh, how can I make my next business? How can I do this? Just approaching it of, okay, I want to standardize everything. Good God, that's done humanity pretty well.
I wonder if I could add something to that as well, because part of what you need to consider is the gun is invented, to use the gun and bullet analogy here, right? And then there are some technological innovations that happen around those times where you have to ask yourself, has something been invented technologically that makes this now possible?
Hmm.
So you might have an idea that feels like a good
Yeah.
idea in this realm, but the technology hasn't yet been invented or it hasn't yet been thoroughly explored. And I would argue that we're actually in the age of something kind of miraculous now with AI, and that what it is going to do is it's going to unlock our ability to execute on a bunch of ideas like this. And the question really is, what about technology has changed such that this idea is now possible?
Totally love that. Yeah, I definitely agree. And yeah, trying to use that technology in your business best as you can. Like I mentioned, for us, it was like the CNC router. Not that new of a technology, but knowing I wanted to like leverage that. And then the new trend was like, yeah, the vans were getting more popular then. Obviously, they existed before, but trying to use a new trend, new change in like market preferences, and trying to use this technology to leverage that as much as possible. I like the shipping container one a lot just because it's so simple. Like it's a box. And it did take the right person. I forget the gentleman's name, but he was in the shipping industry, so he was able to like help that along. But just that concept of it seems so obvious in hindsight, and you think like someone would have done that. Like instead of every single package being a different size, can we not just have it the same? Seems a little ridiculous. Even like wheels on suitcase. That's probably another final one that's great. Like 1970, wheels on suitcase. Like how does no one think of this type of thing?
We have to
How
go to the moon
often
first.
suitcases wheel? Yeah. How long did they both exist before? Yet it took someone doing it first, and then it just seems so clear. So that's just a message for everyone out there. It's don't get discouraged by thinking that like someone has already thought of it. Or there's all the good ideas are taken. They'll be an obviously good idea only in hindsight.
I completely love that. And then we'll get into our final segment here. But the idea that a lot of the things that you talked about, the suitcase with wheels, the wheelbarrow, it's a box with a wheel
Yeah.
in different iterations. And somehow we stopped. We got, like Jake, you said you had the best point, which is we went to the moon before we had suitcase with wheels. That is completely mind-blowing. Think about how many medical problems that solves. Not just the logistics of moving, but like how many fewer back problems you have. Because but like I love that. This is a great place to end up and do the final questions because it's such a simple idea. It is not quote unquote rocket science as we're comparing this to putting man on the moon.
This is a topic I could go on quite literally for hours because the obvious ideas. Do you guys know about the early basketball hoops?
Oh, like it was a wicker basket, I think.
They didn't have holes.
Yeah.
In early basketball, you would literally, like in the early rules, you would literally have to have someone go up with a ladder and then pick the ball out. And it took decades to go, why isn't it just like a two?
Well, but then you put a hole in it,
Yeah.
and then you put a hole in it, and you're like, wow, but now my ball doesn't go where I want it to go. So how long
It's like, well,
did the hole...
what are we going to do with the ladder now?
Oh, I love this too.
You're going to take the people's ladder jobs. The ladder...
I know.
The basket ladder lobby is going to push against it.
If you ever do end up writing this book, I will totally read it. Also, please put in a chapter about inventions that humanity has forgotten and then rediscovered. Like,
that's a good one too.
My favorite example is concrete. Like, the ancient Romans used concrete everywhere, and then we forgot the recipe. We forgot how to use it, and then we had to rediscover it later. It was just bizarre. Anyway, we want to finish off all these interviews with 5 questions that we want to ask all of our people that are ranging through all different walks of life, but mainly with a business or a makery/entrepreneur bend. But we're going to be asking the same questions to everyone, but these are all rapid fire, so don't think of them too long. We want to dive into them.
I like to think.
First question is, what was the first physical thing that you ever sold?
It was a t-shirt. Yeah, I used to do like t-shirt print, kind of like silkscreen printing or just like making t-shirts in high school. And then I'd sell some of them to friends and I would kind of like make clothing and sell a couple of those. Wasn't big, but it was a fun start.
Our previous guest answer was also, I started selling stuff in middle school and high school to my friends. So if you've done that before, there's a pretty good, it's a pretty good vector. That's going to be
And honestly,
life.
For when I have kids, that's something I would push for is get them to try to sell stuff early on because I think there's like a negative stigma of like selling something. I totally disagree with that. Get them to sell the lemonade early on. It's a good lesson.
Love it. Number 2, what is a tool that you cannot live without?
YouTube.
That's a really good answer.
It's so good for, I recently bought a house and every house project, everything I need to learn on, it's one of the first research I go to.
Number 3, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned from a failure?
Sales solves all, and I'm going back to that, but not being enough focus on sales like from the start. Thinking like, I'm going to make something cool and people will like it. Nope. Make something that people will buy.
But number 4, if you could only work with one material forever, what would it be?
It's got to be wood. I just like that it's kind of, a little bit more renewable.
And then last question, what is the best business advice that you've ever received?
Probably like it'd be something along like fail fast, fail often. Like basically, I don't know a good like shorter way to put that, but basically, yeah, fail fast, fail often. Doesn't matter like how many times you fail. That's just like part of the process. Just fail in as small of a way as you can.
Fantastic, man.
Well, this has been the CADclass Podcast. Once again, I'm Josh.
I'm Jake.
And thanks for having me, guys. It was a great time. I guess I'll do a final little plug here. If you guys ever want to learn more about us, it's at vantopiavans.com. You can check out our YouTube, check out our website. Always feel free to reach out to us as well. And this was great. If anyone else wants to have me on podcast, this was a lot of fun. Should do it again.
Thanks so much. See you next time.
Thanks a lot, man.